Dr. Jill Stein will need no introduction for many of you. She's a physician, she's an activist, and she's been the Green Party candidate for the presidency of the United States in 2012 and 2016. She's also, and this may not be so well known, she's also done extensive research in the area of environmental health.
Good afternoon. First, I want to give a big thank you to Doctors for Assange, to Consortium News, and to the Media, Entertainment, and Arts Alliance for making today's really important conversation possible. The health crisis that Julian Assange is facing is a full-blown medical emergency, and it hasn't just occurred, it's been inflicted, specifically by governmental authorities imposing cruel and unusual punishment on Mr. Assange for 7 years. These abusive conditions and the health crisis they've caused constitute psychological torture, according to the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture Nils Melzer, as well as medical professionals specializing in the field. Mr. Assange's health conditions that are publicly known are serious. They rang our alarm bells as physicians when we first heard about them. For myself, that was late May of 2019. These conditions include periodic disorientation and incoherence on top of a profound life-threatening weight loss. These health conditions also developed in a high-risk setting of prolonged and extreme confinement, psychological stress, and deprivation of many things: sunlight, exercise, potentially nutrition. He was denied even 1 hour a day of outdoor recreation and sunlight that prisoners are entitled to. This is a setup for a host of serious problems, including immune suppression, atypical infections, and accidental or covert exposure to drugs, poison, and other toxic substances. And these problems can be very difficult to identify. Standard medical practice requires that these and other potential causes be urgently ruled out. But Mr. Assange's condition cannot be diagnosed or treated without medical technology like MRI scans and specialists available at a tertiary care academic hospital, not in the basement of the Belmarsh prison, or any prison for that matter. Therefore, Julian Assange should be allowed to transfer to such a facility immediately. Further, he must not stand trial in February. All else aside, an untreated victim of torture who is still being tortured is by definition not fit for trial. The torture of Julian Assange has created a health crisis for him, but for broader society, this is a democracy crisis. Torture is the trademark of authoritarianism and is inherently an assault on democracy, aside from being illegal under national and international law. The torture of Assange is especially toxic to democracy because of its legal dimensions. In the words of the UN Special Rapporteur, Julian Assange has not been legally prosecuted so much as persecuted in a series of cases that have systematically violated the rule of law, have little to no basis in fact, have blocked his legal defense, and effectively silenced and ensnared him for extradition to the United States. The UN Rapporteur identified 50 legal and due process violations related to the Swedish allegations alone, allegations for which charges have never even been filed. The legal persecution of Julian Assange has essentially made a mockery of our judicial system. For the sake of all of us, it needs to end, as the Special Rapporteur has called for. The torture of Assange is also dangerous for democracy because of its implications for freedom of the press, which democracy is entirely dependent on. This is perhaps the most critical counterweight to the abuse of governmental power, especially in an age of unbridled militarism and political repression. According to Jamil Jaffer, the executive director for the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University, the US indictment of Assange should be understood as an assault on press freedom because it criminalizes routine practices of investigative journalism. According to Time magazine, the most publicly significant national security stories exposing torture and MSA domestic surveillance, for example, were based on secret information. Publication of these stories led to sweeping reforms of US policy. The danger of going after Assange, civil libertarians say, is an attack on Americans' right to know about what the government does with taxpayer dollars in our name. Years of public torture of Mr. Assange, a journalist who's exposed government war crimes, corruption, and illegalities, sends a chilling message to the press that any authoritarian power would be proud of. This is perhaps the biggest threat to our democracy. The recent release of the Afghanistan papers reminds us that the abuses of power are ongoing, and we rely on press freedom as an essential counterweight to this abuse. We stand at the precipice of a war with Iran with the potential to ignite World War III, with the biggest US military budget since World War II just passed with overwhelming bipartisan approval, with 2,000 nuclear weapons on hair trigger alert. The bottom line is this: today's nation states are armed and dangerous. We need the press to do its job as a watchdog of imperial power. Even without a conviction, the torture of Julian Assange effectively intimidates the press out of doing its job that is essential for human survival. In conclusion, I join with Doctors for Assange and with the UN Rapporteur Nils Melzer in calling for an immediate transfer of Julian Assange to a tertiary care academic medical hospital, for Assange to be declared unfit for trial due to the debilitating impacts of torture, which are ongoing, and for his legal persecution to end altogether. Doctors for Assange calls on the Australian government as well to diplomatically intervene and bring Mr. Assange home now. We urge other doctors to sign on to the physician's letter, and we urge all people who are concerned about the future of democracy and human rights to please contact your elected officials on all of these counts at all levels of government. Let's have justice for Julian and democracy for all of us.